Did the Trojan War really start because of love? That's the story most of us have heard. A Trojan prince named Paris fell in love with Helen, the most beautiful woman in Greece. He took her back to Troy. Her husband got furious, and suddenly thousands of soldiers were fighting in a war that would last 10 years. But was that really the reason? Or is that just the version people liked telling? Because when historians looked a little closer, they found something interesting. The story doesn't actually begin with Paris or Helen. It begins with a wedding. Yes, a wedding. The sea goddess Thetis was marrying a mortal hero named Peleus. Almost every god was invited to celebrate, except one, Eris, the goddess of discord. Now, let's be honest. If someone's entire personality is starting arguments, leaving them off the guest list sounds like a reasonable decision. Unfortunately, Eris didn't take it very well. Instead of staying home, she decided to ruin the party. She threw a golden apple into the middle of the wedding. Written on it were just 2 words, for the fairest. That was all it took. Immediately, 3 powerful goddesses claimed the apple: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Each believed she deserved it. None of them was willing to admit defeat. Normally, Zeus should have settled the argument, but Zeus decided to stay out of it. Instead, he gave the impossible job to a young Trojan prince named Paris. Think about that for a second. The king of the gods refused to judge a beauty contest, so he asked a prince to do it instead. What could possibly go wrong? Well, pretty much everything. Because the 3 goddesses weren't just asking Paris to choose. They were about to make him offers he couldn't easily refuse, and one choice would change history forever. Paris now had 3 choices, and each goddess wanted to win. So instead of waiting for an honest decision, they started making offers. Hera spoke first. "Choose me, and I'll make you the most powerful king in the world." Not a bad deal. Then Athena stepped forward. "Choose me, and I'll give you wisdom and victory in every battle, power, glory, a name that would be remembered forever." Then came Aphrodite. Her offer was completely different. "Choose me, and I'll give you the most beautiful woman in the world." Paris didn't hesitate for long. He handed the golden apple to Aphrodite. That single decision changed everything. Because there was one small problem. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen. And Helen was already married. She was the wife of Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Soon after, Paris traveled to Sparta. This is where the story becomes a little unclear. According to some ancient sources, Helen fell in love with Paris and chose to leave with him. Others claim Paris kidnapped her. The truth? Nobody knows for sure. But one thing is certain. When Paris returned to Troy, Helen went with him. When Menelaus came home and discovered what had happened, he was furious. Defeating Troy wasn't something he could do alone, so he turned to his brother Agamemnon for help. Agamemnon then called on the kings of Greece. Years earlier, many of them had wanted to marry Helen. To prevent conflict among themselves, they had sworn an oath. Whoever married Helen, the others would defend that marriage if it was ever threatened. What once seemed like a simple promise now gave almost every major Greek kingdom a reason to go to war. Thousands of soldiers gathered. Hundreds of ships were prepared. One of the greatest military expeditions in Greek mythology was about to begin. But here's the real question. Did entire kingdoms really fight for 10 years over one woman? Or was there something much bigger going on? So far, the story sounds simple. A prince falls in love. A queen disappears. A war begins. But historians aren't completely convinced. Think about it. Would dozens of kingdoms really send thousands of soldiers, build hundreds of ships, and fight for 10 years just because one king's wife disappeared? Probably not. That's why many historians believe love wasn't the real reason. It may have simply been the excuse. To understand why, we need to look at where Troy was located. The city stood near the Dardanelles in what is now northwestern Turkey. This wasn't just another ancient city. It controlled one of the most important routes between the Aegean Sea and the Black Sea. Almost every merchant sailing through the region had to pass nearby, and if you control an important trade route, you control wealth. And wealth brings power. Suddenly, Troy wasn't just a city with impressive walls. It was one of the most valuable and strategic places in the ancient world. Many historians believe the Greek kingdoms had wanted control of this region for years. So, when Helen disappeared, it may have given them the perfect reason to attack. After all, saying, "We're invading because we want control of trade," doesn't sound very heroic. But saying, "We're fighting to bring Helen home," that's a story people would remember. Whether that's what really happened, we'll probably never know. But one thing is certain. The Greeks eventually reached Troy, and they expected a quick victory. Instead, they found a city protected by enormous walls. Every attack failed. Years passed. Neither side could win. The war reached a stalemate. That's when one man came up with an idea so clever that people are still talking about it more than 3,000 years later. His name was Odysseus, and his plan would become one of the most famous military tricks in history. For 10 years, the Greeks couldn't capture Troy. Thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, years of fighting, And still, the city's walls held strong. At this point, everyone was running out of ideas. That's when Odysseus stepped in. Unlike Achilles, he wasn't famous for his strength. He was famous for his intelligence. And he came up with a plan that sounded completely impossible. If we can't defeat them by force, maybe we can fool them instead. According to the legend, the Greeks built a giant wooden horse. Then they hid a small group of soldiers inside it. The rest of the army appeared to sail away, making it look as if they had finally given up. When the people of Troy woke up the next morning, the Greek camp was empty. The enemy was gone. All that remained was the enormous wooden horse. The Greeks had even left behind a man named Sinon, who convinced the Trojans that the horse was a gift to the gods. Some people in Troy celebrated. The war is finally over. But not everyone believed the story. A Trojan priest named Laocoon warned the people not to trust the horse. According to a later Roman epic, the Aeneid, he said, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." Unfortunately, nobody listened. According to the legend, 2 giant sea serpents appeared and killed Laocoon and his sons. The Trojans believed this was a sign from the gods. Instead of destroying the horse, they pulled it inside the city. That night, while the people of Troy celebrated their victory, the Greek soldiers climbed out of the wooden horse. They quietly opened the city gates. The Greek army, which had secretly returned under the cover of darkness, rushed inside. By sunrise, Troy had fallen. It's one of the most famous stories ever told. But there's one problem. No archaeological evidence of the wooden horse has ever been found. Some historians think it may have been a siege machine. Others believe it was simply a powerful symbol added to the legend over time. Whatever the truth may be, the story of the Trojan horse has become one of history's greatest tales of strategy and deception. Now for the biggest question. Did the Trojan War actually happen? The answer is probably, but not exactly the way the legends describe it. For centuries, many people believed Troy existed only in mythology. Then, in the 1870s, German archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann began excavating a site called Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. What he found changed everything. Troy was real. In fact, archaeologists discovered that several ancient cities had been built on top of one another over thousands of years. Today, the layers known as Troy 6 and Troy 7a are considered the strongest candidates for the city that inspired Homer's Iliad. The excavations revealed burned buildings, collapsed walls, arrowheads, and other signs of violent destruction dating to the Late Bronze Age. These discoveries show that Troy suffered one or more major conflicts. But they do not prove that Homer's Trojan War happened exactly as the poem describes. That's where history and legend begin to separate. Was Paris a real prince? We don't know. Was Helen a real queen? We don't know. Did Achilles, Hector, or Odysseus actually exist? Again, we don't know. And despite centuries of excavations, no evidence of a giant wooden horse has ever been found. Some historians think the horse may have represented a siege machine. Others believe it was a symbolic story added long after the war. No one can say for certain. Most historians believe the Trojan War was probably inspired by a real conflict. But over the centuries, that conflict became mixed with myths, gods, heroes, and unforgettable legends. So, the city was real. A war probably happened. But the story we know today is likely a blend of history and mythology. And maybe that's exactly why people are still talking about the Trojan War more than 3,000 years later. Because history tells us what happened. Legends make sure we never forget it. So, what do you think? Did the Trojan War really start because of love? Or was love simply the perfect excuse for a war about power and trade? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next History Flops episode.